Back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, on this nice summer afternoon here. It's about 75 degrees. So I got to thinking about episodes, because man, you guys have given me some amazing ideas. I am doing tons of research in random areas based on your recommendations to see if I can add anything to the subject matter that you guys picked out for me. I have to bring something special to it. I can't just regurgitate what other people say. Usually that's not terribly hard to do because we all have different brains. This episode's about something that I think plagues a lot of us. I've got an episode called Calming Your Soul, which is kind of the precursor to this episode, but this one's about stress. How to identify it, how to perceive it, and methods that you can use very easily right away to kind of let it melt off of you. And it's going to need some macro view concepts and some micro view concepts, right? So you need to look at it from a certain elevation and understand where it comes from. And I think you need to understand down at the meticulous level, when you're putting your head down at night and the world seems a little bit smaller, how to deal with it, how to process it, right? I have always been a person who challenged myself from a very young age, and I think life was challenging to me as well, and perhaps that's where it kind of started. But I would be sitting in wherever the hell I lived as a kid, and I would purposely create a project that was very stressful, or at least really complex, and then I'd push through it. I'd bite off too much constantly. I'd say, well, they would expect me to be able to make this much stuff at this age. Screw that, I'm going to do 4 times as much. If it was, hey, my reading level should be at this, infantile stage, because that's how, Dumbing Down America works, I would go off and grab an encyclopedia, some sort of research book, and read that at like 9 years old. I've always pushed. So your humble narrator is perhaps a little different than most people in terms of how I perceive stress. But the thing is that there's 2 ways to view stress. If it's stress that you control, it's much more friendly to your being, because you're the one that made it happen, right? If it is stress that's being imposed upon you, that can be very frustrating, because you have a sense that you don't control your life. And for whatever reason, our creators have programmed us to want to have control over our lives. It's the most amazing thing. That's why some parts of society refuse to endorse change, because they've just barely convinced themselves that they actually have control over the chaos that is their world, right? And if something comes around and says, oh no, we're going to make it all different, and it's way better, they're terrified because they don't understand what the definition of better is. They're not even sure how the hell they got where they are to perceive the control that they have, right? But when I was a kid, let's just put it this way, and as I grew up, and I was probably a kid until I was in my 30s, pushing myself into project after project, going into companies and getting very senior roles and having the whole product line on my back in my mid to late 20s. At times I worked for companies and I would become the lead engineer or the senior engineer, and what we sold every single 6-month period was something that I would invent, and it paid everyone's salaries, everyone locally in the United States and everybody over in England, based on engineering that was going on internally by other, dozens of other people. But when it really became a product, that was my responsibility. to conceive of it, to polish it, to find the need, like Steve Jobs would do, and then engineer the final product together, right, with a small team. And so I always had stress, but I also had the excitement of the responsibility, and I could see the outcome of what I was going to be creating. I could see the customers, because I always use the products that I assist. Like, it's one of these things of, have you ever used some sort of appliance in the kitchen, and right away you know that the people that assemble it, or the people that even designed it, don't use that type of appliance, right? It might be a blender or something. You use a computer, and you're like, do you even use a computer? The Windows programmers, it always baffled me that they would create as many windows as possible. Like, you would go into dialogue, you'd be 8 dialogues deep to change some little property on a driver, and you sit there and you say, how could those engineers possibly think this was a good idea? And you think, because they don't use their own product. And so when I would push myself into a stressful situation, the stress meant something different to me. It was kind of a warm, wombish compression on my soul that said, we're doing this, and this is going to be tough, but we're going to get it done. There's a certainty of that, and we know that people are going to love it, because you know you would love this to exist, right? But that's probably not the brand of stress that you're terribly concerned about if you're going to watch this episode. The kind of stress you're worried about is the variables of life of which you do not control changing outside of parameters that you're willing to accept, right? What does that mean? You got a job, you got an income. You don't mind the job, maybe you even love the job. Maybe you hate the job, but you got to take it. You got to do the work. And you get your money, and you come home, and you pay for your obligations, your mortgage, your car loan, the electricity, your cell phone, your children, your spouse. And then something happens in the stock market, something happens in the global banking cartel, as fueled by the 16th Amendment of the United States of America, which pretty much fucked the entire world. And they're creating a boom, they're taking a boom cycle to a bust cycle. And you have no control over this, right? Other than to vote these assholes out of office and redo some basic monetary constitutional amendments. But that's a long haul, right? In the immediate, present, now, someone is playing with your life. They're playing with your financial certainty. A variable is being altered. A variable that is a part of the direct equation for you to feel comfortable every single time you wake up in the morning, put on your clothes, go to work, leave, come home, and try to enjoy your evening before you go back to bed again. If you come home like most people, or you wake up like most people, you're reading some news, and the news is telling you that it's about to hit the fan. And you're like, wow, how could it possibly be going to be hitting the fan when everything's fine right now? Now, we won't jump off into the specifics of how that happens. But in the end, when a variable gets changed that threatens your livelihood, that's where stress starts to occur. And stress is the byproduct of uncertainty in most cases. You're stressed because you don't know the outcome of an event. But you either need that event to turn out the way it needs to turn out, or you want it to turn out. Perhaps it's an opportunity of a lifetime. And you know that you want to be a part of that unique opportunity. You know that you're willing to do whatever it takes to be a part of that opportunity. Work 20 hours a day, you'll do it. But the problem is you don't control the variables. Perhaps you don't even control the opportunity to participate, even though you know deep down in your heart you are the person they need to succeed. And what I want to highlight here is that I think that there are obviously different cycles in history where what I'm saying applies and doesn't apply. But let's just take the last 100 years. I would say that if you were to go into my hometown in 1965 and say, have you ever heard of a homeless person? The best they could do was talk about the hobos out of the 30s, the guys that just jumped trains constantly, went from city to city, which obviously I think that would have been a blast. Just, it's only going to last maybe a decade tops if you jumped on a train in 1930, but I don't think it started until probably about 34. You wait for the war to come around, you enlist, you get scooped up off the street, and you go become useful, and then you just blend right back into society. But some of these guys were in their their 50s, 60s, and 70s, hobos, because that's all they could do. America didn't want to employ them anymore. The trade skills weren't so great. The revolution of industrial design made things, outside their reach. To assemble a car was way more complicated than it was 20 years earlier. But the reason why I mention this little cyclical thing is because I want to put into context what I'm saying. Today we fear things that society didn't fear 50, 60 years ago, in my opinion. A hobo chose to be a hobo in a lot of cases. They've written songs about it, they've written books about it. Just get into it. There was a whole revered lifestyle in that level of freedom. Because the world was plentiful and this population wasn't overdone, there was always a loaf of bread here, a pie hanging off a windowsill there. Yeah, probably stole a few of the goods they needed, but I think people could find good people. And the whole world was suffering, right? But today it's much more surgical, isn't it? The world is much more populated, regardless if you conceive of it being overpopulated or not. It's really dense now. Traffic in Los Angeles is sometimes inconceivably dense. You'll be traveling in time frames in LA where everyone should be at work. And it's packed, it's jammed, and you're like, why doesn't everyone have a job? Right? But we have developed, and this is the point of me going off on this digression, we have developed society to a point we've invented all of these constructs, all of these things that are perceived as wants or needs that didn't exist 60, 70, 100, 150 years ago. But now they're an interwoven part of our daily model, the things that we need. And society, quite frankly, has impressed upon you things that you need. Who has a home phone hooked up to their house? Raise your hand. Not much, right? Not many folks have home phones. Everyone has a cell phone. Well, home phones were damn near free. I mean, I'm serious. What did you pay? $15 a month, $25 a month? But you did have long distance calls, charges and all that stuff back in the day. But now everyone owns a cell phone. And the cell phones range from we only usually pay a few bucks down, but every single month that we pay this huge fee, we're paying for the phone, we're paying for the service. Phones are like between $600 to Apple's new iPhone 8, which is going to be like $1,200 for the top model. Insane. So they've convinced us to ditch this old technology and replaced it with extremely expensive technology. And now if you were to reduce your life to the bare minimum essentials of life, you have to have a cell phone. We've now allowed existence tax to be passed in the United States of America, which is called health care, the Obamacare thing. Okay. So I'm sure there's a bunch of welfare things you could get involved in, but just think about it. When you start to reduce yourself into a situation where you might be in a cyclone of destruction for a really short period of time, you're going into a valley and not a peak, life is going to get hard for whatever reason. Your bare essentials, your strategic resources that you think you need and that you may actually need, it's way bigger now. That picnic basket, it's really huge as opposed to what it used to be. But this is something that I want to highlight because we intellectualize our needs in this world. There are homeless people all over the beach here in Southern California that barely have a pot to piss in. They carry around all of their wares in summertime, their winter wares in summertime. Now, we do get some pretty cold nights still. But they're going to be carrying around their winter stuff for fall because they don't want to have to go find it again. Some of the guys shed it, but most of them have pretty intense clothing. So you can see individuals that have reduced themselves down to their primal, feral state of, this is all I need to really stay alive so I can wake up tomorrow. They got their water, they got a little bit of food on them, and just provisions to stay warm. Now let's think about, I'm going to come at career here for a second. Because it's more linear. It's the first thing you run into after you get out of school is your career. And I want to highlight the fact that there are things about your career that are perhaps necessities, and there are things that are perhaps just the things that you believe that you really, really want for yourself. And I am entirely guilty of all this, which is why I'm an expert. So what's the imperative when it comes to your career? Well, the imperative is that you get a job and you earn enough money to pay your bills. Your strategic resource bills, right? Your food, your shelter, your water, all that good stuff. Clothes on your back, all that good stuff, right? The next tier up is your personal, almost persona desires for yourself. You've been asked since you were a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you kept answering the question. When I was a kid, it was extremely simple. The whole fucking world was going to be overpopulated with nurses and firemen. I don't even know. I guess the nurses would be the only people that could start a fire because all the men would be in firehouses. But there is that extra layer on top, which is you want to do what the hell you want to do. Now, unfortunately, like I've mentioned several times on the show, the kids of today grow up with no hobbies, and so they hit 18. They have no idea what they want to do. They don't have any parents in their lives to help them pay attention to what they actually enjoy doing in their teenage years, other than, look at a cell phone. And so they get degrees in crap that they have no interest in. Then they spend, however many years bumbling around careers they don't like. Either they end up taking the career and forcing some Stockholm Syndrome love for the career, or they break free and they succeed in changing everything and figuring out the themes of which they enjoy in life and going after that, right? But there is this layer on top of most of us, which says that we want to get a job that has a couple properties to it. One, we don't want to be embarrassed telling other people what the hell we do. It's sort of a pop culture thing, of course, right? Two, we want to have fun with our job. We want a job that's so great that when we wake up, we love it. We bounce out of bed in the morning, right? I'm pretty sure Steven Spielberg bounced out of bed for the majority of his life once he started making film. Because he loved film. He loved the art. He loved the finished product. And so he worked tirelessly to create his first 20 years worth of films. Well, is succeeding really easy? Prince said something in Baby I'm a Star, his lyrics, where he said, when you got a baby, nothing comes too hard. I'm going to tell you right now that is probably the most wise statement you could hear in terms of getting your destiny in this world. And what he's talking about is, when you got it, that little tiny collection of words means when you have the skills that you need to do what you need to do. And, let's be clear. You don't start off, Danny Elfman 2017 in terms of being a musician unless you be a alien dropped off with amazing musical ability. Even Danny Elfman turned out, at the very beginning, bouncing into his Oingo Boingo band way back in the 70s, late 60s. He fumbled around. He just played junk, and eventually he played great music. Motley Crue talked about sitting inside of a garage and playing crap for ages and ages. The Beatles, right? They wrote nearly 50 songs before they wrote a single song anybody wanted to hear, but they screwed up 50 times. But they showed the universe, remember my creativity commitment here, they showed the universe that they're willing to invest and they're willing to push hard. And here comes the universe going, boom, okay. Well, we have tons of music for you guys. We just need the artist to commit in front of us so that we can give it to you. And sadly, some bands eat themselves alive, right? But we still get the gems, right? So stress, I think in its most fundamental definition, is two factors. It is your perception of having a lack of control in your life. Again, every single thing you do every single day is a bunch of variables that are executing and that are like code that's executing, right? When you double-click Microsoft Word, a lot of things are happening inside the brains of the computer to bring that application up. Every time you touch the keyboard, a bunch of calculations are happening to move that data into the bowels of the computer so you can see it on the screen. That's every moment of your life. And so the second part of it is, that's the mathematical part, but the psychological part is that you believe that something needs to happen. Now, again, that you understand the fundamentals of life, that certain things definitely need to happen, right? You need to be able to eat, drink, sleep, and that kind of stuff. But I want you to try in your mind to separate, as hard as it might be, the difference between your wants and your needs. There's a really interesting thing that happens in life when you have a near-death experience. When you have a near-death experience, the universe sort of gives you a chance to reassess yourself. And I've never known it to be, I'm sure this has happened, but I've not known someone to go down to death, bounce back, and not have a completely different view of life. You know, I got a business partner of mine who just died at his country club, was resuscitated with a defibrillator. He had to have 2 pops on the defibrillator, woke him up. He had no idea what happened. And he eventually had, some heart surgery and cleaned them all up. And today he says, I have more clarity than I've ever had. He goes, everything is just simpler, cleaner. And he goes, I'm just happy to be here, man. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. And I can tell, having known him for several months before this occurred to him, and knowing him now, he is happier. His life is simplified. It never really was that complicated, but the one thing that happened was, I just mentioned there's 2 things we want to keep in mind. There's the calculation of sort of the core things that have to happen in this world, and then there's, which is like your strategic resources that you need, and then there's the psychological layer of what you think you care about that's on top of that. He had a clarification when he finally got through all of his surgeries and all this good stuff, and he turned out fantastic. He's super healthy now. He's going to be healthier for the rest of his life than he was before this moment, which is fantastic. He realizes he has all of his strategic resources. He does. And he's adjusted the layer above that to simplify itself. What do you need? I don't need that much, is really what he's found out. As much as we are completely different human beings, we might believe, there's a large group of you that believe the world is a ball. There's a large group of you that believe it's flat. There's a large group of people that believe that Jesus Christ really existed. There's a large group of us that don't think he existed. Okay. But in the end, those are intellectual privileges that we get because a bunch of people fought wars. And not that we should have needed to fight wars to get to where we are, but we fought and we divided up our land, and then we sang kumbaya and held hands in most cases. And now we have the freedom to think, to see the world, and appreciate the nuances of it, right? I assure you that the number one thing that you want to be able to do is wake up in the morning. That's the number one thing. From that point, it is gravy. Now, again, I'm not pounding rocks in some North Korean prison, so I don't mean to include the extremes of life. But for the majority of the world, even those that get paid $2.20 a day in China to build iPhones, it's better than a lot of alternatives that we've seen in history. But let's talk about your perception of reality without stress and your perception of reality with stress. Now, most of you understand that when you look straight ahead, let's say you sit in a chair and you look straight ahead. If you're driving your car and you're listening to me on podcasts, just think about the fact you're paying attention to the traffic in front of you. And if you're sitting at your desk or whatever, just pay attention to your eyeballs. You have massive peripheral vision. Your peripheral vision is more than 90 degrees to the left of center and more than 90 degrees to the right of center. On average, it's 100 degrees left. So 10 degrees back behind the line that goes perpendicular out from your ears. You can see a ton of the world with these eyeballs, which is actually utterly fascinating if you look at the shape of the lens, the shape of our eyes, that it can catch so much light almost behind our head, right? So now I want you to keep that in mind, and then I want you to think about you wearing blinders. And blinders are those things they put on horses to get rid of their peripheral vision. You've seen them in old movies where they have these little mud flaps that are hanging on the left and right side of the horse's head. That was to keep them focused and going straight. They found that putting these blinders on horses made them much easier to travel within a city because they didn't get spooked by things to the left and right, which might be merging with them, coming at them, etc. Okay, how does this apply to stress? I want you to understand that you have a set of eyes that also are duplicitous when it comes to viewing the world according to your stress levels. Okay? When you are not stressed, when you are informed that you won the lottery and it's a $400 million lottery, what is happening is you get maximum peripheral vision of the world. All of the beautiful things the world has to offer, sound, sight, smell, all the five senses, plus some spiritual just relaxation in the sixth sense. You have maximum view. You can sit on a beach in Hawaii and get it. You can see the gods of Kamehameha up there just forging those islands with his bare hands, right? But when you're stressed, the blinders come in. And they're not fixed. It's not like you just have 100% blinders. Depending on your stress level, your peripheral vision, the angle of view, starts to come in and come in and come in, and you can see less and less of the world, which means you can appreciate less and less of the world. This is a big deal because it affects your ability to mathematically be happy and your ability to be alive. When you are stressed, you are, let's say you're super stressed and you are laser focused. Those blinders allow you to see, maybe 12 inches of view right in front of your face. It's like wearing one of those horrible VR headsets, right? You have to look for the action all the time, right? Same thing. But you tend to laser focus on the things that are driving you crazy. You try to laser focus on earning money if you have money problems. You tend to laser focus on every interaction with a certain person if you feel like you are in a relationship that's going bad. And this is where we may or may not be losing control. Now, what can happen is life gets good. Now, how many of you have had this happen to you? Okay, life gets good. When life wasn't good, you were thin, you were fit. You weren't exactly mentally fit, but you were physically fit. You spent your money wisely because you didn't have much of it. And then you got fat and happy. Made a bunch of money. And you just look at your photographs. I've had this happen to me. You look at the photographs, you're like, wow, I just gained a pound, I gained a pound, I gained a pound. I got to a point where I found myself in 2012 probably weighing 25 pounds too much. I've talked about this several times, so I won't belabor it. But the idea was I got unstressed. I wasn't paying attention to life. I was enjoying the lack of stress. Now, when I look back on those photographs, I'm actually kind of pissed off. And the reason why is I would never let a soul see these photographs of me all fat, right? But those moments happened. So now I can only really keep the collection of photographs where I'm not in them. Now that might be vain and that might be whatever, but for me, I considered it a personal failure that I had given up on my body. The only thing I've got to sustain this particular instance of my life. And I had defamed it. I had not paid attention to it. I think we owe it to ourselves to covet ourselves, all right? Protect ourselves. Everyone worked really hard to build us to who we are. All of our relatives who had all that stress, they boiled up to make you, and you're an amazing person. And so you own it for now, right? Until you have kids. But you want to be, I think a good example for everyone, everything in this world. But then you went through a stressful moment, whether it be a positive stressful moment or not, and you get lean, right? And your money goes down because you're investing it or whatever you're doing. Maybe your kid needs to go to college and you're throwing the cash at the university or whatever, but you're lean. Your stress level goes up a little bit, maybe a lot. And now all of a sudden you're sort of like a lean machine, man. It's like, wow, when I wasn't in boot camp, I was unhealthy. But when I went to boot camp and had to have a guy smack a trash can at 4 a.m. to get up, had to scrub a toilet with the toothbrush, had to be literally sort of this indentured servant to the military. Yeah, as much as I want to complain about all that hard training, in the end, you're proud of it beyond your wildest dreams, right? How many soldiers I mean, there are good soldiers out there that really love what they do, but there's a lot of guys that went through the military and were freaked out and scared and stressed out of their frickin' mind. But when they're done and they survive the war, they just survive all their tours and all their deployments, and they come back. When they walk down the middle of that street 3 times a year to be celebrated as a soldier, I hope that their chest is bursting with pride that they were able to get through it all and dedicate themselves. Just remember, our police officers do it every day. So I mentioned this analogy of sort of your stress peripheral vision because I want you to understand what you're missing by being stressed. Because I'm going to try to go into some methods here that I use to get around stress, to deal with stress, to categorize it and not let it kill me. And I think I'm only capable of dealing with stress and holding the clay of stress in my hand because I understand where it's forged. I understand I understand the do's and don'ts of what you can do with it. I understand its importance to create the mother of invention. To give you an example of where stress can make wonderful things happen, and I doubt I doubt that any of you don't know this already, but for those of you who like the music of James Brown, which for any of you who like rap music, you have to love James Brown because he gave them all the beats that they started out with. But he talks about being in the late 50s and getting to a point where he had no trade skill that he could find to earn money. And so he started leading a band. And he was starting to make things a little saucier, right? The beats that he was putting together were not beats that, you'd play in your local church because they were more rock and rolly. They're more funk, right? He was inventing funk at the time. We have him in our world because of stress. Financial stress got him to think differently to survive. And he died a very successful man, right? But now let's take the stress of perhaps someone who's lost their cool because they were stressed. And he was definitely accused of it from time to time. How many of you know of a story of someone who has been up to a particular point just a model citizen, a wonderful person? They all of a sudden have life change and they become stressed, and then they do something you couldn't possibly conceive of. They get violent. Maybe they get belligerent. Maybe they start doing a drug, alcohol or other drugs, and they cease to become the person, they cease to remain the person that you've known them as. For those of you who go back to high school reunions, you'll have a person who may have done this and they come back to the reunion and sometimes they physically look really different because they've been under a lot of stress. All the American presidents always go in with usually some fairly normal hair, and they come out very gray, peppered, and just they look worn. The reason why I mention that is that I want you to see the cause and effect model of sort of what stress does to an individual. Most of you already know this, of course, but sometimes you have life behave for a while. It's good for a while. And then because it's been good for so long, you don't make provisions. You don't save money. You don't look ahead or even study the now properly. And then you reach that point where you go back into a valley, which is a reminder of what not to do. Now, having lived a number of years and lived a very intense life myself, there are some times I might welcome an adjustment, and other times I'm thinking, Jesus, I just lived high on the hog a little too long, and I'm going to be missing out on some opportunities had I paid attention that would have been mine. And I never get those years back, right? I never get any previous year I've lived back. And the market that changes in the world in terms of employment or starting new companies, it changes enough that certain opportunities come and they go because other people were on their game at the time. Right place, right time, right? And they take the opportunity and run with it. Now, the truth of the matter is just keep your eyes open, because there's infinite opportunities. You just have to start looking left and right instead of straight ahead sometimes, right? Get unstressed so you can see more of reality, and you will see more opportunity. When you get super stressed, you get irrational, right? Because if you think about your peripheral vision analogy that I just gave you, the idea is these are your senses. This is your information input, right? And when I sit right here, I'm seeing beautiful green all the way around me with my house to the right. I'm taking in that information. If a bird lands in front of me, I notice. Like I have these butterflies that fly around constantly while I'm doing the show. Wasps etching the wood off my table out here to make nests. I watch them while I do the show. It's information. But if I sat here and put the camera right in front of me and put the blinders on, and you and I are just looking eyeball to eyeball, one, it would be very strange, but two, I wouldn't notice what's going on. And the opportunity to see something amazing is now thus reduced, because the aperture of which I see life has been tightened considerably. So when you think about stress freaking you out and making it all messed up, this is the thing I don't hear anyone talk about. They talk about how it's going to make you unhealthy, which we're going to get to as well. So let's talk about the health risk for a second. How many of you have dealt with a piece of electronic equipment that gets confused? It's maybe it's slightly more complex. It's a computer, it's some sort of DVD player, or whatever you're dealing with, a television, and it gets confused. You push the right number of buttons and you found a bug, and the computer's in a loop. And it's like your TV could be going through some weird loop, your computer could be crashing, but you can still move the mouse, and you know it's in there in a loop somewhere, thinking and thinking and thinking. Well, we're exactly the same way when it comes to stress. Your body, although utterly brilliant, is still just your vessel. It is the symbiotic recipient of your soul. And I'm just going with that because that's what I believe on this show. You could insert feedback loops into your life for stress. You know, you ever had the situation where you're just laying your head down at your pillow at night? Now, man, it's good. It's a good day, man. The room's the right temperature. The sheets are all clean. It's really awesome. You got your loved one with you, and it's, you're jackknifing each other, and it's awesome. And then you remember, oh my God, I don't have my car registered. I got that bill. This happened, and you have this piercing cloud of stress hit your chest. And it just changes the state of mind. You were just about to nod off and have one of the best dreams of your life. And all of a sudden you're wide awake, worried about some piece of paper, worried about some gigantic monopoly corporation getting your money, worried about your car getting repoed, worried about getting kicked out of your house, over and over and over, right? That could only happen because you care about being perhaps accountable. And you don't want to get to a point where you don't care, because people will show up at your doorstep every once in a while, depending on what you're neglecting. But as I've said several times on this show before, how many times have you worried about paying a bill? And you've done this your whole life. As soon as you started paying bills, you have that chilling, piercing cloud of ice in your chest that makes your whole body tense up, and because you're worried about something, and the damn thing gets paid every single time. Even if it's late, even if you got to charge off your credit cards or whatever the hell it is, it always resolves and you always end up on your feet. But in the meantime, you sort of have this deteriorating penalty in your health because you allow it to consume you. As I said several times on the show, the concept rents space in your mind. It's got a little sublease inside your head that it lives, and it can just torture you. Well, this is where we have to very carefully, okay, I say this with a caution, very carefully figure out whether or not you actually have to care, or whether or not sitting in your bed at night is going to do anything to make things better. Now, believe me, I understand this is an easier said than done thing, and it's frustrating as hell that you can't just say, well, look, I'm in bed. The best thing I can do to pay my bills tomorrow is to get a good night's sleep today. So really, the best thing I can do is just go to bed and feel warm and fuzzy that I'm going to wake up tomorrow just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. I'm going to go after the world and get things paid off, or do whatever the hell you got to do. But it's never that easy, is it? as a footnote to that whole concept of worrying about bills and worrying about demise, most of us have a friend that's gone through a lot of shit in life. They've lost their cars, they've lost their homes, they've lost things. But a lot of them don't quite get to that terminal level of actual massive change. But they've got bills they haven't been able to pay. And somehow they always end up on their feet. And you have no problem walking up to them, hearing about their distress, and encouraging that things are going to be okay. Just hunker down and get things done. But when it comes for us to take that same advice for our own problems, we tend to be less compassionate or less in belief that our own advice works. But I'm going to tell you the secret is that our advice does work. We just need to take it every once in a while. Now, in terms of health, what happens is this. Any feedback loop of stress starts to get the body really confused because you, in order to have an emotion, have to use up electricity to make it happen. How many times have you gone into a masseuse that gives you like a full body massage? You're at some spa, you're at some vacation, you're on a cruise, whatever, and it's just a really good one. You have someone who really just roughs you up the way you like it. You went in all stressed out, but when you came out, you almost feel like a zombie. You feel clean. You feel like the meridian lines of, your veins and your arteries that carry electricity around, You feel like you've been reborn in one way or another. And you say on the way out, God, I got to do this more often. You're not wrong. You do. We all need to have one of these once a week. I mean, seriously. If you want everyone to be really healthy in the world, if we just had clinics that just did this, and you can get them here in Huntington Beach with, all your clothes on. They do amazing jobs. But that clears you out. The big deal about stress in your life, and this is why lying is really bad for you, okay, is that you start confusing all of your DNA's natural growth patterns. You start introducing electrical patterns that aren't the electrical patterns of sustaining healthy life. And as de Lamarck figured out way before Darwin created his very primitive botched Darwinism, the French scientist de Lamarck had figured out that we are electrical beings, and that the quality and the overall path of the electricity that makes up our day-to-day, second-to-second life is what determines our health. The membrane of all your cells are the brainiacs of your cell, not the nucleus. Okay, if you want to read more about that, read all Bruce Lipton's books. But when you send a cell a really confused, nonsensical reaction to a thought that you've had, which is now only able to be conceived of in your mind because you're intellectualizing it into existence, right? Caveman never thought about, the fucking 9/11 tax on your cell phone bill that just pisses you off, right? He never thought about that. He just woke up, kind of shook it off. There was no whistle that he had to go to work and punch a clock. He knew he needed to hunt. If they were running out of food, they needed to get some crops or whatever worked out in the granary. But we have created all this stress. So when cells do not get clean information and clean electricity, what do you think happens to them? Right? What happens to them? What happens when you put anything other than gasoline in your car? Put some water in there and see what happens. Put some sugar in there and see what happens. Put some sawdust in there and see what happens. You'll ruin your car because it's not gasoline. There's something called the law of particulates. When you breathe anything other than pure oxygen, you're not doing your cells any health because you're reducing the amount of metabolized oxygen in your blood supply. That's why we got to get planes out of the sky that leave white fucking clouds in the sky, right? That's where I turn on a little bit of swearing. There's an old saying that is, what happens to liars? They get cancer and they die. And I first heard that and I thought, wow, that is the most silly thing I've ever heard in my life. And that was my opinion probably 25 years ago. And today I will tell you that that is a mantra to live by. But a lot of people misunderstand the quality of that statement. Lying would be going out and telling a bunch of people untruths, right? Yeah, sure. That'll do it. Little white lies here and there because you play Santa Claus at the mall, probably a little bit different because your soul gets redeemed by the beauty of the child believing in this fictitious thing. But how many of us wake up every day and we have a few lies that we tell ourselves every day? I look great when you don't. I don't need to work today when you do. All those little micro fractures in the fabric of who you are as a person. If they are deceitful, there's a bunch of stuff that happens here. When you live in truth, you feel redeemed constantly. The feeling of truth going through your body is a cool, reinforcing, almost Holy Spirit sort of thing. It is as if God himself is going through your system on, a routine basis. You're the light bulb, and God is the electron cloud that goes through you to turn you on. And you feel alive and bright and on when you're in truth. When you tell a lie, there's a couple things that happen here. One, you're having to obviously be convinced that you can't tell the truth. So that's an acidic emotion in your system. If you want to slow down time, right? It's an acidic emotion that makes you want to deceive to survive, because usually lies are a matter of self-preservation in almost every single scenario. Now, some people are real bastards and they lie to just get ahead when they don't need it because they're greedy. But whatever, they still feel the same thing I'm telling you. I don't really think there are too many people that feel warm and fuzzy about lying. But then they have to construct the lie. So they have this emotion. Now they got to use their brain to be deceitful. And some of them can get adrenaline and dopamine running because they're like, wow, look how creative I am in telling a lie that's going to get me what I don't deserve. The next stage is they have to remember the lie. They have to categorize the lie. And every time their brain approaches this particular subject matter in conversation, they have a veneer over that moment, which is the deceitful cloud of what's actually not happening or what actually didn't happen. A chronic liar typically has to rehearse the lies over and over and over again to the point they get really good at telling them, where the muscle memory inside their mind is so worked out that they start to lose track of what reality is. I'll give you an example. If O.J. Simpson killed Ron Goldman and his wife, he is sitting in prison and sitting at home, whenever, every day from the moment he did that till today, rehearsing how he didn't do it. Such that when he gets confronted with it, his entire demeanor passes. It passes the test that we would put on it. We look at his face, we look for muscle tics, and did he touch his ear? Did he blink a lot? Did he hyperventilate? He needs to be at a point where he can absolutely recall where he was, which is perhaps maybe where he wasn't, and pass the test. So he has to remember it. The other thing is, you usually tell a lie to one person, and then if that person tells someone else, hey, this guy said he went to the moon. Well, now you're going to get perhaps, you felt like you could lie to the person that had 110 IQ. But they tell a bunch of people with 180 IQs, and now you got a problem because these other guys are going to come in and go, all right, Mr. Armstrong, why don't you sit down, and we're going to ask you some scientific questions of which will determine whether or not you really win or not. And as you contradict yourself, or your fellow astronauts will know someone is lying and that you didn't go, which is what happened. But now think about it. You work really hard to tell a really great lie. All right? Now, you have all this due diligence you have to do constantly, right? You have to polish the lie over and over and over in your mind. You have to remember it every single time you go by. That's why Buzz Aldrin's screwing up now. That's why he said on I think on Arizona, nightly news, once we figure out how to get to the moon, it'll be a lot easier to get to Mars. He's losing the faculties in his brain to hang on to this stressful frequency of the lie. I can only hope that at least one of them before they die says, I don't give a shit anymore. Take my pension, whatever. I'm going to tell the truth. By the way, I misquoted that Michael Collins had passed away in Ojai. It's a different guy that died in Ojai. One of the astronauts. He died on the just before the 40th anniversary. He's the guy that actually said that he was going to blow the whistle. So I got that wrong. But what do you do if you find yourself, let's just do a little digression on lying. I'm probably going to do an entire episode on this, even though I talk about it constantly. What do you do if you got yourself in a situation where you have sort of a glove compartment of lies that you've told? The damage has either been done or there can't be any more damage as a result of those lies. They're so in the past, okay, that bringing them out could just do harm, and it's not going to benefit anyone. Well, you're not supposed to say on shows like this, just keep them in the glove compartment and don't worry about them. But that's what I'm going to tell you to do. Because if you're at my smoke lounge with, 5 of the wisest men you could possibly bump into, that's the advice they would give you. But they would also look you in the eye and say, you fucked up in creating those lies in that glove compartment. Okay? So what you want to do is take the glove compartment and turn it into a symbol of the do and don't rule of the world, and don't do it again. It is going to be the reason that you're going to carry to your grave that you don't want to tell any more lies, because remember the glove compartment? Remember the skeletons that are in there? Now, the truth of the matter is you might find yourself capable of telling strangers about what's in the glove compartment, and at least you kind of got it off your chest. Probably one of the wisest things the Catholic Church ever did was create confession, because at least you could tell someone who listened to you. You could build a rapport with that person. Priests were psychologists. That's what they were. They gave you prayers you could go home and say, which weren't in the Bible, but it made you feel better. You paid attrition. You repented for what you did. At least you said sorry to everybody but the people that you lied to. But maybe it makes you more steadfast in behaving much better to them for the rest of your life with them. Now, let me give you some sort of thought processes to hopefully help you de-intellectualize yourself a little bit, to perhaps reduce the significance of certain things in your life. And I'm going to give you very specific things. What I want you to do is not only listen to this very specific example, but I want you to think about it as a theme over other similar things in your life, such that you can get more mileage out of this example. All right? They say that ignorance of the law is no excuse. If you break the law and you go to court and you say, geez, I didn't know that was a law. There's a lot of guys that get caught urinating out in the back of public places. They're in an alleyway. No one can really see them, but if they get caught, they become a sexual predator, sexual offender, and they go on these lists which they don't deserve to be on. But they go to court and they say, my God, I didn't know you couldn't pee in public. And I probably didn't know. I probably knew you couldn't pee in public, but I had no idea the consequences were going to put me in a camp with a bunch of pedophiles. And they say, well, Mr. Whatever, ignorance of the law. Okay. 2 things here. What human being on earth knows all the laws in the world? Is it possible to know all the laws in the world? Do we have the mental capacity, besides perhaps the advancement that true autism gives an individual, to know all of the laws in the world? Every ordinance, every federal law, state law, district law, whatever. The answer is hell no. It's impossible for the average human being, even advanced human beings, to know all the laws. It's impossible. You'd have to go to school for 20 years to remotely have a chance. And oh, by the way, laws get retired, new laws get added. How could you possibly read all the material in a lifetime? There's too many words to read. So their assertion is a physical impossibility that will put you in jail. The tax code in the United States of America, at least, is impossible to learn. There's no CPA on planet Earth that knows all the tax codes. There's some that know quite a bit. I helped invent the product TurboTax back in the day. It used to be called Macintax. I sat in rooms with some of the most brilliant CPAs in the world who had hot red phones directly into the IRS to talk to their top dogs. And on average, the IRS called our guy to figure out how particular disputes were going to be resolved in the tax law because our guy was smarter. Okay. So if you're stressed about things like this, there has to be some rational reduction in that process by saying it's just impossible to do certain things that these sort of matter-of-fact absolutes impose on humanity. Now, those are two gigantic ones, right? And I'm not saying you turn into a vigilante or some anarchist and you run in court and say, oh, I saw deep thoughts. He said there's no way you could understand all the laws. Common law is the only one you need. Do no harm to others. And then everything falls into place. That's really the only law that you need to do. And when they bring you into court, they go, did you understand common law? Did you understand you're not supposed to hurt anyone else? And you can't say no. You say, yeah, I know. Well, what did you think? You can't harm yourself, and you can't harm others. So when you took all those drugs and racked up your body, and then you went in and stole all that stuff, and you killed a guy or whatever, and you're like on your third violation for the day. That's why common law is so beautiful. But think about the tax laws. The tax laws are imposed on you illegally in this country, especially for your wages at least. It's the one thing fake news will never cover. But it's starting to leak out again and again. Getting control over your life is the key to really wrangling stress. One of the things that drives people crazy is whether or not they're ever going to be able to change the life that they're in. And I'm going to tell you in 99.9% of the cases, you always change your life. You can. You can completely change it. It just takes a little while longer than you want it to. But I have known friends of mine, male and female, who've had, the horrible awakening in their 40s that life is changing. Their employment opportunities are different because they're older. They work in younger industries, right? I worked in the game industry, the video game industry, since I was 19 years old. Well, in my 40s now, there's not a lot of companies that will snap at my resume, regardless of how massively packed it is. Because in their brain, they don't have time to bring everyone in who's a maybe when they think they've got resumes that are certainties. And so they keep creating these really immature games that keep repeating history because the kids that are so young, they don't have any history in their mind. And so they're creating crap. And so these companies are going down the tubes because they thumb their nose at the masters of the industry. A few companies are smart enough to hang on to them, and that's why they're very, very successful. But there's only so long you're going to fight sort of the injustices of the world, as you might classify them, right? I don't try to go back into the video game industry in the way that I was in it before, because I know that they don't understand what's going on, and if they did, they'll find me, or we'll find each other through some happenstance situation. So what I do now is I lecture at colleges about the neural chemistry of creating games, because I'm at that level where I understand how dopamine and testosterone contribute to the overall gaming experience. I've studied literally the millisecond, picosecond, dumping of these chemicals to figure out how you can design a game to beautifully marry the actual biological flow of the brain to have the best experience. Nintendo is one of the only companies in the world that remotely studies this kind of thing. People at Nintendo wear lab coats. Do you know that? Because they consider what they do to be a science. They will study the neurological patterns of a human being for 10 years in little tiny experimental rooms. And then they'll make a choice inside Zelda to monopolize on something they figured out. But you go to any Activision subsidiary, any EA subsidiary, and, there's none of that. And so they repeat history over and over and over again. But what I did to get out of that sort of frustration bubble of going, geez, I'm at the peak of my skill set. I think every day is your peak, quite frankly, if you stay on something. But here I'm at the peak of my skill set. I'm teaching students at two different colleges how to go into the industry and succeed. But for whatever reason, it's hard to convince the industry that you're still of value, which is interesting. So I contribute from the bottom end. But I've decided to take my skill set, go off to a different industry that will benefit gaming tremendously, and I don't have to worry about how the games are created. I don't have to make the next best game on planet Earth. I just can take that game and move it into my industry and hopefully make some people really happy and maybe a little money along the way, right? But that's me thinking dynamically about the restrictions that I have. Instead of wallowing in pity and that kind of stuff and saying, woe is me, I'm being extremely aggressive about it. In doing so, though, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I have created a situation that is very stressful. that has a lot of risk to it, that consumes a lot of money to get started and make it happen. But every day, I just focus. When I have to deal with work-related issues, I personally put the blinders on, not out of stress, but out of the need to focus, right? There's a great book out there I want to recommend to all of you, and it's called That One Thing. It's a tiny little book. Get it on audio if you drive in your cars, but I want you to get this book if you're stressed, if you just want control over your life a little bit more, or if you're trying to advance the agenda in your life and succeed. I'm telling you, the younger that you are, the more you need to read this book. This book should be given to freaking 15-year-olds, and you should have to read it every single year until you stop going to school, and you should have to tell someone else about the book from start to finish such that you will know it like the back of your hand. It becomes your mantra. But the book's focus is focus. You need to pick one thing and focus on it until you exhaust it. It's not a sin to change your mind at all. That's fine. But at least if you do change your mind, it'll be such an informed decision on your part that you'll go on to another equally impressive thing. A lot of times, for instance, the analogy would be you need to get on the roof of your house, or a roof. There's 2 ladders up against this building, and perhaps the first ladder goes to the first roof, and the second ladder goes to the second roof. I don't know how this house would work, but let's just keep that analogy in our head. So you're crawling up the ladder, and it's scary, right? Ladders aren't exactly the most warm, fuzzy things, especially if you're using your home ladder, right? But at some point, you're 3/4 the way up, and you're stressed beyond your wildest dreams. It doesn't look like this is where you're really supposed to be. You started analyzing. You stop climbing for a second. You start looking around going, oh my God, the place I really need to be is the second roof, not this first roof. Nothing wrong with the first roof, but my goal is up there a little higher. And so as stressful as it might be, you have to either climb down the first ladder, get on the second ladder, climb up, or if you're capable, which is more often than not the case, you need to transfer to the other ladder, right in midstream, which just picture that in your head. You'll probably feel a little stressed. Once you get on that ladder, though, the one that's right for you, every step gets that much easier. Because now you know you were on the wrong ladder, and now you're on the right ladder, and you're climbing up to the destiny or the milestone that you need to get finished to get to the final thing, or maybe it is the final thing, right? I would suggest in that metaphor that every step is a milestone. But now there's a little saying in life that is extremely cliche, and the sad part about cliches is that you're tired of hearing them, but in the end they're true most of the time. And the cliche is nothing risked, nothing gained. And let me tell you, that is a huge fabric in the world. And I'm going to give you a bigger version of that I hopefully will sit with you a little deeper in your soul than nothing risked, nothing gained. This is how I've been living my life for probably the last 2 years, and it's a result of doing this show. Just hearing my own voice talk, which, is not exactly that pleasant. I made a decision in doing all these, probably in the episode of Creating the Universe. In my own private thinking after the episode, I thought, well, what's interesting is I keep trying to figure out what's the benefit of us being in existence at all. If we have a creator, fine. It's a god, it's an alien that reports to a god, or whatever. Doesn't matter. Pick your poison. Only an atheist could blow this off. Which is, does the universe really need another trivial human being to exist? Wake up, you're born, you believe in a bunch of magic, you kind of straighten yourself out, you get some education, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you have grandkids, and then you die. There's a lot of wonderful things we all know that happen in these moments. Just looking into a young child's eyes is enough to understand a big portion of the universe. But there is a little avenue for you personally. There's a personal accomplishment track that you're on as an individual. And the idea is, do you want to end your life sort of a cliche? It could be pure truth, could be pure good, could be pure great. But I keep thinking, why do skills exist? Why do talents exist, right? Talents are skills you find very early in life and metabolize up at an early age. But it's all the same shit. You got to work your ass off to get there. I have chosen personally to say the universe doesn't want me to be trivial. I must push the envelope. I must risk at the total peril of my future or present. I must strive to be something the universe has rarely seen, I should say. I don't think we can ever probably say never seen, but rarely seen. This is one thing I have with the frustration of the lifespan of a human being as society is currently designed. Just about the time you get your shit together, you lose your eyesight and you start getting old, right? But I'll tell you what, I hang out with guys, my business partners that range, and my associates and my mentors, they're from 67 to 83. That's their ages. And what's interesting about that is that you can get a tremendous amount of mentorship just listening and not saying anything. Just listen and observe and try to figure out how they got to their level of success. Now, you may not take anything about them but one little element of their behavior. You may think they're a total jerk, but you can still distill out of them beautiful things that you can apply to yourself and do correct, right? I said a long time ago, every other manager I had in life before I became a manager and started running my own companies was a jerk. But all the others, every other one, was the most amazing human being I've ever met in my life. And they oddly were exactly what I needed at that point in my life to get to the next level. Like I had an intellectual capacity to understand spoken word, and they were there meeting me eye to eye. They could read me, they could figure out what I could understand, what I couldn't understand. They understood what I needed to hear as encouragement, and they knew what I needed to hear in terms of stop bitching and moaning and just get down to business. Yeah, you're going to have to stay up 2 days in a row. Tough shit. That's what greatness is made out of. Now, I have an episode on time management which doesn't get listened to because I think people misinterpret what they're going to hear. But if you haven't heard it and you're interested in this particular episode, it's about how I manage my day-to-day time. It's a real personal kind of walkthrough with a bunch of generic lessons in there. But, I don't waste a second of my life according to my standards, right? If I take a nap in the middle of the afternoon for half an hour because I'm totally exhausted, I think that's exactly what I needed at that moment to recharge, to wake back up and do what I need to do. Because we have so many portable devices, I can take portable devices with me to the restroom, and I don't waste any time there, I hate to break your bubble, but when I'm replying to you guys on YouTube and doing little Facebook posts and things, half the time I'm in the restroom because that's when I got the time to do it. The reason why I mention that little digression is that stress can be invented out of things that you love. And so there is definitely a stress that comes with perhaps those of you who lift weights. You understand you're stressing your body, and you don't always want to lift weights every single day. You don't want to go running, whatever your endeavor is. But when you get done, damn it, you're like, why don't I do this every single day? Because it makes me feel amazing. That the human body loves being stressed physically, right? For those of you who are, let's just put it this way, male, female, doesn't matter. You turn on the TV, you watch a movie, you live in a nice area like Southern California, and you see these amazingly fit people that are your age, if not older, and they look amazing. They're physically fit. They have all the muscles that you want, all the body tone that you want. And a lot of times you'll feel stressed looking at them because you're like, Jesus, how often does that guy get to go to the gym? I don't have that kind of time to go to the gym. But there are ways. I have to sit down and record this episode. I have an audio file over there, got a video file up here. I bring them into Final Cut in my office. I sync them up. I cut down all of the pauses. And then I have to bring the playhead back to the beginning, and I push play. And I have to listen to my voice for an hour and a half, an hour. It's excruciating, trust me. And I have my weights in the office with me. One of my techniques is to say, I'm stuck. I'm a captive of my own creation. But to push these episodes out, I got to sit and watch. So sometimes I'll get into Photoshop and work on a project. I'll do something artistic where I can listen at the same exact time, or I'll just lift weights. And I can't lift weights for an hour and a half, for God's sakes. But I'll go off and do 15 minutes here. Sit down. I'll feel amazing. All that incredible testosterone and all that stuff jumping into my system, and I'll do a little bit of something on the side, and then I might go back and do another 15-minute session. I might continue it 3 or 4 times during an episode. In the end, when I go to bed at night and I take all my clothes off, I look in the mirror and I'm like, Jesus, I love the way that looks. I love it. So I start reinforcing in my brain the Tony Robbins technique, put the pain where it needs to be and put the positivity where it needs to be. And stress can be inside both those buckets and not always be acidic to your system. What else does stress do to us? Well, stress creates situations where we do things to mellow out chemically. My confession is cigars, which you do not inhale, by the way, are devices of which, we don't inhale them down to our lungs, so we don't pollute our lungs too bad, because they're not made of paper and chemicals and insulation from your ceiling, cigarettes. We just get a little bit of blood sugar level displacement from the tobacco that goes into our saliva in our mouth, right? But what else do people do? They drink. They come home and they say, I need this. And they pour themselves a drink. Whether it be a little bit of alcohol or a lot of alcohol, it doesn't matter. Their liver is getting assassinated by the drink. Some people do hardcore drugs. Some people just smoke weed. So these apparatus can give us a momentary control over our life, smooth us out, get rid of the stress levels. And what's interesting is if you study Sumerian text, and even some Egyptian text, but it's really hardcore in the Sumerian tablets, they wrote down a lot of the recipes that they did for healing people. And I think the ailments back in those days were fairly trivial compared to what we have today. But at the end of every single recipe, or I should say nearly every recipe, they would say, drink beer. So these bullshit stories about monks inventing fermented fruits is just insane. Beer and alcohol, spirits were all invented by nature. When fruits hit the ground and fermented over time in the sun, and someone just picked it up and ate it, they got drunk. And eventually someone put the connection together where you can actually incubate that and distill it in a way that's drinkable. If you want to see a hilarious video, go look at the guy from the Aussie Man who's got this. He took a nature video where a bunch of animals had eaten some fruits that had fermented, that were shaken down from elephants, and they all ate this fermented fruit, and you got monkeys and boars and elephants, and everyone's getting shit-faced eating this stuff. It's hilarious, right? But you have to pick your poison. You have to pick the one that's going to damage your body the least. And be very, very careful. Can you imagine getting your life together, right? You've totally figured everything out. Whatever age you are, it doesn't really matter. But you hit this euphoric sort of mean in your life. And then you die because of the mechanism you used to get there. The drugs finally take over. Your liver goes pop. You get some other sort of cancer, some other brain damage or something. Life is sort of a video game. I've mentioned this a couple times. A lot of you know this for a fact who play video games. Unless someone tells you that you control the variables that control you, you might go your whole life. You might be 88 years old, having never known that a lot of the trials and tribulations that you dealt with that damaged you, that removed your ability to be happy, were based on variables that you actually controlled. Now, we all have variables we can't control. If you fall in love with someone that's not good for you, man, that's a tough one. That's a super tough one. At that point, you have to use, again, I would say Tony Robbins' technique of really analyzing the pain and pleasure of being with them to the point where whatever rationale and confidence you need to remove that person from your life is made possible through perhaps a very long process of attaching the bad moments to being with this person. And you just simply, at one point, your body will go, look, we don't want to be with that person because of all this negativity, despite the positive things that occur. But the one thing I want to leave you with, and this is an analogy I use all the time in different shows here, but this one's real important. Please don't let yourself be the pinball in the pinball machine that has no control over itself. Life are the bumpers, the flippers, the kickers inside the pinball machine. And for those of you too young to know what those are, I think you understand what I'm saying regardless. You don't want to be subject to the world just kicking you around like a can. It's okay if you wake up and you realize, wow, I am the pinball. Holy shit, I don't want to be the pinball. Where do I even start? Well, your solution is one tiny variable at a time. We are so electronic now that there's a sad reality to us solving problems in our life. But let me suggest to you the primitive method for solving most of your problems in life. It's called a pen and paper. Screw your iPhone, screw your tablet, screw your computer. Get a pen and paper. Preferably a notebook that just has paper in it with either lines or no lines. And you need to start documenting your life, documenting what's good, what's bad. If you want, just make a column, a 2-column piece of paper. Just draw a T at the top, and then draw the T all the way to the bottom of the page. And all the stuff you hate on the left, and all the stuff you love on the right. Things that bother you on the left, things that you love on the right. Now, for the things that are on the right, well, you might want to study them, make sure that you can, you're not doing anything that would sabotage them, right? If you're with a person you really love and you've got some squeeze on the side, it's probably time to make a choice. Even if you can play the game and both people don't know it, it's a bad formula to get into, let me tell you, right? But all those things about your life, all the employment things, YouTube, as I've said several times, it's a college course onto itself. I would love to have enough money to take some kids at 18 and ask them what they want to be in life, build them a place they can come, put them in a cubicle, and have assistants help them find videos online that teach them everything about what they want to do. And just see if we can't get a kid to have a higher IQ in 4 years than someone going to any major university on planet Earth. Because they can watch the lectures at the colleges that cost $500,000 per degree. And the beautiful thing is the theme of this show is rebuilding society. To re-highlight the wisdom that was lost that's only, 50, 60 years old. 50, 60 years ago, you could find wise people everywhere, males, females, whatever, and they could just tell you a couple sentences and your whole life would be better. But those people have passed on. They're my grandparents. You see kids today behaving badly. Well, you've got, baby boomer children raising Gen X children, raising Gen Y children, and Gen Z children. No wonder. Where's any of the wisdom coming from, right? So we have to work together and pass the information that we have to each other. That's why your comments in the comments section on YouTube are extremely important. Share what's worked in your life. Hey, I had this problem. This is what I did to fix it. It worked for me. It may not work for you. But hey, man, if you can touch one person in the world, think about it. You post a comment on a video and one person reads it and goes, oh my God, you're right. A plus B equals C, cause and effect model. And what if that person is 20 years old and lives to be 100? Your impact from a single comment provided 80 years of bliss for another human being, or a much better life than they would have had they not read your words. Pretty powerful stuff, right? We have to believe in this process of information exchange. And currently, even though Obama gave the United States internet over to ICANN before he left, hopefully we can get that control back. But hopefully we don't lose this beautiful means of communicating with each other. We're in a Renaissance 2.0 of intellectual and spiritual exploding. Right? The world is waking up. We are rebirthing, probably better than any time in history, the ability to think. You don't have to agree with anything that I say, but if I make you think about what you contrarily believe, right? You don't believe what I believe because you believe in other philosophy. Then I've got you to think about what you love more in the world, which is the truth that you believe. There's a powerful thing. I got a lot of unsubscriptions when I did the episode on aliens and demons. I really threw down my disdain for the way that Christianity has kind of affected the world. Not the message within and the truth within, but the fact that I don't believe that Jesus ever existed. But if I say that and it riles you up, then your belief in Christ fortifies. And if that's what you want to believe, hey, there you go. I just strengthened your belief. even though I am a person who doesn't believe what you believe. On that note, let's just put a little footnote in before we close out this rather long episode. The movie Last Temptation of Christ, directed by Martin Scorsese with Willem Dafoe playing Jesus, a lot of people protested that show in 1985 when it came out. Embarrassingly so. But the funny thing is that if they had watched the movie, if you believe in Christ, at the end of that film, if your belief in Christ doesn't increase, then you're missing the point of the show. It was actually it was a movie created to help you believe in Christ by taking him down a path that, if you believed in him, could not have happened. It had no value to go the other way. And so him dying for our sins and all that stuff became the focal point, the apex of the entire movie, the climax of Act 3. But the ignorant people protested it, having never seen it. I hope you feel me in this episode. One of the most common requests I get is to deal with stress. Do you have an episode that deals with stress? And I always point them at the Calming Your Soul episode, which, if you want any more of this particular talk, go and look up Calming Your Soul. I forgot what number it is. I believe it's season 2. It could be season 1, I'm not sure. But do me a favor, as your homework. 1, if you're stressed, please listen to this episode as many times as you need to start fortifying methodologies and perspectives to get yourself out of that torment, because you don't deserve to be stressed. It will make you unhealthy. It could potentially develop cancers in your life. So it's important that you make changes. Sometimes you have to make big changes. Risk to gain, right? I picked up everything I owned at 17 years old, with $236 in my pocket, having just spent $100 to get to California. And I drove to California in a 1976 Dodge Charger Special Edition, right? Which looks like a Cordoba, not the General Lee. I drove to California, and I said in my mind, I'd already lined up a job, but I said in my mind, if I got to live in my car, then that's what I got to do. I risked everything. My reputation, potentially, in terms of, Guns N' Roses, I was coming to the jungle, Southern California. But I showed the universe that I was willing to take that risk, to do anything to better myself and better my family. And I did it. I didn't have any money, any silver spoon or anything like that. Worked it up from nothing. But I also had a beautiful childhood in the 80s where I personally charged myself from the age of 9 and up to be the very best at every single thing I wanted to be. And so by the time I got to California and bumped shoulders with other folks, they thought I was a college student at 18. I had my high school ring on, and people asked me what college that was. And they asked me that because I was operating at their level. You can be that way too. Doesn't matter how old you are, man. You can take up a brand new sport in life, a brand new career, a brand new way of making money. Or whatever, finding love, being a better person, calming down. How many people that you know in life that were really angry when they were young and they just petered out, they just calmed down? Or maybe they were really narcissistic when they were young, and then they kind of released their ego because they realized they did succeed. By being narcissistic, they succeeded. And then it was kind of like, hey, I've been privileged to succeed, and now I don't need to showboat it to anybody, right? Hopefully you don't go through that problem, but if you're in that problem, that's one thing that might happen to you, right? But if you are in a position of success right now, you feel very comfortable with your life, my homework for you is to try and find someone you can pass that information to. And if, let's say you're a 65-year-old male and you're sitting in your studio apartment or whatever, your nice house, your $1 million home or whatever, and you're bored to death. You got all the money in the world that you want. Doesn't mean you're a 100 millionaire, but you got enough. You got your residuals coming in. You don't need to do anything. Well, try to find somebody you can pass it to. Doesn't have to be a little kid. Could be someone in their 20s, someone in their 30s. Could be your neighbor. Could be the guy sitting next to you at the deli or at the the breakfast spot, the diner. Best thing you can do is, make conversation with them and ask that magic question. Well, what do you do for a living? Boom, at that point, you open up their soul. You can find out where they've been for years or maybe a couple months if they're in the middle of a high-risk situation. I mentioned this before. I'll mention it again, then I'll close out here. I met a guy at a smoke lounge about 15 miles from here, and he had worked for another man at a air conditioning company, I guess air conditioning heating company, for 20 years. And his father was involved at some investment level with another guy, and his father was retiring, and he was worried that the guy that his father was partner with didn't like him very much. He wanted his children to take over the company, not his partner, which was him. And I talked with him for about a half an hour, and I just kept iterating, listening to what he was saying, and did a reflection session with the guy so he could hear his own words. And we got to the end of the conversation. I said, look, what you've told me is you've got everything lined up to start your own business. You got the clients. You have 100% of the knowledge. You know where the workers are. People like you more than this other asshole, so you could probably get them to jump ship to you. You're not going to jump ship into a void. You're going to jump ship into half a dozen customers, if not a dozen customers. So you're going to be able to pay the bills. You can work out of your house. Just have your trucks all loaded up, ready to go. Get a little tiny warehouse for any products that you need to store. Doesn't sound like his business worked that way in the first place. They order exactly what the customer needs, and there's a lead time, and they install it. It's great. By the time I was done with this guy, he had heard about 80% of his own words back. I had a 20% new DNA of proving to the guy that he had every single thing in place to succeed. He was a new man. By the end of the conversation, he actually turned to me and said, I have to talk with you more often, because this is what I've needed to hear for 20 years. And my father's not telling me these things. Be that guy that talks to people, or that girl. Some of you probably don't feel qualified because you're trying to get your own game together, but I'm willing to bet you've succeeded in some areas that you think are trivial that other people think are insurmountable. Be that person. Anyway, I think that's it. If you made it this far, you deserve a trophy. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. If you're coming in on video, there is an audio podcast. If you're coming through a podcast, there's video in case you like to stare at YouTube. The podcast options are iTunes and Google Play, but you can also go straight to DeepThoughtsRadio.com, click the little icon on the right to get the podcast feed. Again, if you're coming in on a computer, don't try to do that because it's really meant for mobile devices. If you're coming through a computer, just go to iTunes or Google Play and it'll figure out what device you can hear it on your thing. But if you're coming through a computer, just watch it on YouTube. It's easy enough. We have a locked Facebook group, and membership is steadily growing. I'm vetting people as much as I can. We are getting some folks from around the world that don't apparently speak English, so I'm trying to vet them. So I go into your profiles and take a look. Make sure you have some active posts with some intelligent dialogue that is your words. The kiss of death is me going to your profile and you've posted a bunch of crap and advertisements, and then I know you're fake. But those aren't people I'm talking to because they don't exist. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.